right. Greetings, you glorious, you miserable accursed. It's Herle here. We're at 2/3 of our normal strength on Curse of Politics today because, goddammit, we're Scottless. Reid is teaching at Queen's University all this week, where the syllabus includes successful Jean Chrétien mimicry and the murder of syntax that entails, how to impress George W. Bush with your manliness and Musk, and the power of fuck versus great Christ in political comms. However, the great Leichnitz and Kory Teneycke are here, and so we press on. Here's the rundown today. Federal fundraising. Tories are making a killing in both dollars and number of contributors. Liberals and NDP are not. We'll dive into what that means. Our cursed clipping is Pierre Poilievre's op-ed in the National Post, Memo to Corporate Canada. Mr. Poilievre has an unorthodox approach to coalition building, and that's the frame I want to give this discussion. And then we'll go deep on stakeholder relations, expectations management, and the Canada Disability Benefit in the latest budget. And finally, it's Mr. Pinsent with our Hey Yous. Kory, Jordan, can we be entertaining without Reid, do you think?
Think so.
Yeah, you think so?
I hope so. I also have news for you guys. Guess what I spent my weekend doing? Learning how to be a barista. I went to barista school with Nicole.
Wow.
Because it's important to have a fallback.
I thought you were more optimistic about the Ford government than that.
Really, we're reaching peak here.
Yeah, no, you got to have a second skill, you know? Yeah, anyway, it was actually a lot of fun. I had no fucking clue how complicated making a proper espresso is. It's like a lot more complicated than I ever understood. Anyway.
And what's your latte art situation?
Oh, okay. That is a good question. I did practice doing latte art. I was supposed to do the heart. It looked kind of like a butt, like a big butt, like as in an ass, as opposed to a heart. And my leaf looked like a radish. But anyway, practice. Next time you guys are over, I will make you lattes with latte art.
Love it.
What about names? Are you good at remembering names?
No, not really. Yeah. So I could work at Starbucks.
I was going to say, that's the part where there's no overlap between politics and working at Starbucks. It surely would not be the knowing names portion.
I find it pretty amusing when what Kory comes out as at Starbucks.
Yeah.
I had a good weekend. We did the CN Cycle for CHEO event here in Ottawa. I just wanted to shout out about that because it was really great. So that's for the Children's Hospital for Pediatric Cancer Care, and just like thousands of folks out, really well attended, really well organized. And I was out there with a bunch of friends and my toddler, and it was wonderful.
Did you have sponsors?
No. We just fundraised in our neighborhood, and yeah, it was great.
No, but I mean, you go around and get people to pledge a certain amount per mile that you go and stuff like that. Is that how it goes?
Yeah. It was great. It was really good. Yeah, my toddler was very into the whole scene. But it was a wonderful family event, and great to see so many people out supporting that work.
Good, and obviously good weather, which is great because I'm heading up there tomorrow. So the weather's all right?
Yeah, well, it is now. We set it up for you. It was tough, but we got it done.
Right. Politics in the Pen dinner tomorrow night. You're going to be there, Kory. Are you going to be there, Jordan?
I don't think so. Got some family stuff.
All right. Okay.
I will be there. Tuxedo and all.
Yeah. The Jason Kenney-Kathleen Wynne show will be interesting to see.
Oh, I was trying to give him inappropriate jokes earlier in the week. I'm not sure if he's going to use any of them, though. Probably not. Advisably not.
Well, Kathleen has her own source of those, and you can imagine what they are. Okay, so Jordan, listen to this and weep, all right? The latest quarter's fundraising totals came out last week. Conservatives raised $10.7 million. Liberals raised $3 million. NDP $1.3 million. In the fiscal year 2023, the Conservatives raised $35 million. The Liberals $15 million. And the NDP about $7 million. This is a massive discrepancy and an historically unusually large discrepancy. Things get equalized in the writ period with spending limits, but for instance, we've been talking endlessly about when the Liberals might choose to run an election campaign. What would be the right time for them to engage in an election campaign? In the meantime, Conservatives have been on the air for 9 months, and there's no reason to believe they'll ever come off the air.
Well, why would you when you're rolling in money?
Exactly, right? So, and with declining reach and influence of legacy media, money becomes even more acute to get your message out to people. So, Kory, what do you think the impacts are of this massive advantage that the Conservatives have over the other two parties?
Well, it means it's a big mismatch in terms of the fight that they're going into. It's less the dollar figure, although that is representative, obviously, of how well you're doing at your fundraising. It is what you said earlier. It is the ads. It is what you're doing with the money that creates such an advantage. This business is all about framing. It's all about setting up that vote and getting people thinking about the issues that you want them thinking about and having those in the window going into the campaign. And short of paid advertising, I don't know how you really do it in the modern campaign environment. It used to be such an earned media focused business that we were in. And I got to tell you, what the media do and say does not amount to a hill of beans anymore. Of course it matters to a certain degree, but comparatively to, what this business looked like and the importance of that in the past to what it is now, you might as well say it's meaningless. Like the differential is so huge. So yeah, it's a huge advantage. I'll put in a plug for the province of Ontario too, because you're seeing the same thing going on provincially in Ontario also. And I think, they kind of feed each other a little bit.
Right.
Yeah,
Jordan,
I would
the NDP
agree.
are used to being short of money relative to the other parties, but you have generally been able to count on earned media evening that out a little bit. No?
I don't think so. And I was reflecting on this a little bit as we talked about it last week, just chatting. And I don't think that the NDP actually has ever really been able to rely on getting earned media with any sort of ease or regularity. It has always been an uphill slog. And the reality is that federally, within the bubble, for the NDP, the megaphone has always just been smaller, and it takes that much more effort to break into those blue-red stories. Those are the stories that we know that journalists are going to naturally write, that pundits are going to naturally talk to. And so it's always been effective communications departments for the federal NDP have always really had to go in, elbows up, and do a lot of work on share of mind and do a lot of work to set the table to get any earned media that's favorable at all. Like I can recall even under Jack Layton, calling and arguing with journalists to get the third clip in the story, that's a fight, right? So I don't think that there was necessarily a reliance on earned media because it was always also so challenging to get. But I do think the difference is that it speaks a little bit to what you mentioned, David. The party is used to not being the leader in fundraising. They are used to having relatively fewer resources coming in between campaigns. And for them, I'm also in, you kind of have to look at other metrics too, right? Going into the next campaign, for example, it's the first time the NDP is going to be running a campaign debt-free since 2015. And that, some of these things start to make a really big difference in terms of the type of campaign that you can imagine. Can you run fully funded? Those things matter a lot as well, and they don't always get captured in the quarterly fundraising results. I think that what we're seeing right now, the huge, and it's not even a gap, it's a chasm. It's like the Grand fucking Canyon, right? Between the Conservatives and everybody else. If I'm the Liberals, I think I'm a lot more concerned because this is historically something that has not been the case. That gap has not been so large. And I think there's a lot more reliance in the Liberal Party on having that money coming in between campaigns. For the NDP, I think you're always going to see that campaigns matter quite a bit in terms of fundraising. That's when you're really going to see the machine spin up and those donations start to roll in a significant way. But even if things stay sort of static for them, this is sort of what they're used to working with. And in some ways, the table is set better for them going into the next cycle than it has for the last few previous cycles under Singh's leadership. So I think I'm much more worried if I'm the red team on these numbers, but they're not great for anyone except Pierre Poilievre.
Kory, do you have any idea how the Liberals could motivate donors?
Well, you can't do it overnight. The fundraising advantages that the Conservatives are demonstrating, a lot of them have always been there in terms of the relatively higher number of donors that, despite what folks think, they're mostly small donations, but, very broadly based. But when you look at how they fundraise and the things that they press on, it's not the general issues over time. It's niches. There are niches within their activist base. Like I'll speak more to sort of the Harper era stuff when I was more directly involved in the producing of fundraising materials and the approving of them. But things like gun control, things like the wheat board when it was still around, you would find like issues like that. I don't know how much money the Conservative Party raised on the issue of the wheat board, but it would have been millions of dollars. And on anti-C68, the long gun registry, tens of millions of dollars over the years. And so, it's not the same script that you're pushing out to everyone. I would say, what is the equivalent to something like the wheat board for Polyev, only probably better. It's defunding of the CBC. Like they've been, we were putting some of those out back in Doug Finley days, but the pace and tempo of them has increased significantly.
You could set your watch by it at this point.
But you've got to have an activist base. And so, when I see, the scorn from corners of the media and the commentariat for some of the things that Polyev does routinely and that other conservative leaders have done routinely, where they scoff at it as, Trumpian or, juvenile or what have you, he's feeding and watering that base and creating content, which then gets pushed out through fundraising products and brings in money. And so, don't hate the player, hate the game, or, what's the saying that you would use? But like the fact that the Conservatives have figured out how you master fundraising, and it's not a right wing versus left wing thing. Bernie Sanders does all of this stuff. You can look at left-wing candidates, progressive candidates in the United States. They do all the same kinds of things that I'm talking about. It's just maybe, Kory, they're beneath the likes of the great Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. They debase them, and therefore they get no fucking money.
What about if I put a theory to you people? That's obviously a theory that's generous to the Liberal Party, but nonetheless, I'm interested to hear your take on it, which is, you're telling me that people who are angry about something, who really want to change something, are most likely to give money. Well, if historically the Liberal Party is a moderate party and the other two parties are ideological parties, then it's likely that they're going to have more motivated bases than the moderates do. I mean, we just saw how through the Jean Charest campaign, how easy it is to motivate moderates to get involved in politics. So, I mean, in my lifetime in the Liberal Party, when I first got involved, popular fundraising was a secondary thing that was largely for ridings. And the federal party got financed by big business. You'd go around, each bank would give us $500,000 every year. The telcos, the railway companies, everybody would give us a large sum of money, and they'd give the Conservatives roughly the same money, and they'd throw some scraps at the NDP. And that was how the Liberal Party was financed. And then Chrétien changed that to a subsidy, a per-vote subsidy. And the Liberal Party lived off that for about a decade. And then we didn't know how to raise any money from people until Trudeau came along, and he had a brand that could raise some money from people, although I don't think ever as much as the Conservatives are able to raise. But is this system peculiarly difficult for a centrist party to operate in?
No.
Not
at all.
Look at like it's a nice theory. It's just not accurate, because you see progressive and centrist candidates everywhere else around the world, and including at the provincial level, depending on who you're talking about, able to raise money. But you've got to ask. You've got there's more of a science to this than an art. And I just don't think they have ever set up the infrastructure required to do it. I don't think they track people the way you need to if you want to put the right ask in front of them. I just don't think they get the mechanics of it well. And I think it's not a priority for them in the way it needs to be. Like, Look, if you're an elected official in the United States, if you're in Congress, you're spending 80+% of your time. It's probably more than 90% of your time fundraising. How much time do you think somebody in the Liberal caucus spends on fundraising?
Yeah.
Like if you were to say, in brackets, between 0 and 5%, I think that's more likely.
Yeah.
Like where it is. So if you don't do the work, you don't get the results.
Yeah.
It's
but
really
I think
simple.
that what Kory's pointing to, like that comparison with the US, like, the US style of like call time where candidates and, folks in Congress have to spend hours on the phone with large donors, like that model is not really applicable here because of the death of corporate donations. Like, so what's really far more important is the other thing that Kory was talking about, which is that parties maintaining their databases, tracking engagement, and reaching out to anybody who's shown a modicum of interest and moving them up that engagement ladder to become a donor, and ideally a regular one. And look, I got every reason to believe that the Liberals are doing the basics on that because it would be professional malpractice not to at this stage of the game. But
I don't believe that there's a donor ladder, though. I don't buy that. Like that's just not ever been my experience in terms of how you raise money. You're out prospecting for people to donate on certain issue sets. And it's less of a come and like me this much, and then come and volunteer, and I'm going to get to know you, and then I'm going to ask you for money. No, you just go and fucking ask for money from people until you find people that are going to give you money, and then you ask them again, preferably on the same topic area. So like, I just think at a very base, I don't think you guys fucking get how to do this.
Yeah, but it also works better if you're not in a death spiral, right? So that's the other challenge. Okay. Like momentum is a very, very, very important in terms of rolling in large donations and significant amounts of small dollar fundraising. And so if your party is unpopular and not doing well, that is going to be deeply reflected in your fundraising numbers. And I think that's another challenge that the Liberals are facing.
So how is it the Reform Party could outraise the NDP and the Liberals when they were at 20% in the polls?
Well, because they had an extremely motivated base, right? But the Liberals as a centrist party, and I'm not defending them here because I think that it's a failure for them. They have a much larger pool of potential donors to draw from. So you have to think that it evens out, right? Smaller pool, more motivated, larger pool, less motivated. But when you're just like, there's that smell on you that it's not working, people are not excited by what you're bringing forward, they are not feeling like you are something they want to be a part of, that's a really major issue. And I would say, like, just to speak to what the New Democrats are doing, like on issues and topics, because I think it's really, those examples that Kory brings up are really interesting. And, I certainly remember very vividly the gun control stuff was incredible fundraiser for the Conservatives. But for the NDP right now, the best fundraiser that Singh has is that we are fighting the Conservatives. We are the ones standing up to Poilievre. And that's what's motivating the NDP base there to be part of that in the hopes, of course, of supplanting the Liberals.
Well, it's
quarters and loonies, though, for Christ's sake, compared to what the Conservatives are raising.
Sure.
So, Kory, what you're saying is the Liberals should not be fundraising on the basis of support this progressive budget for Canada. They should be fundraising on the basis that, like the Republicans in the States, Poilievre's going to take the right to choose away from women.
Yeah, I would probably do something like that. I would take eat the rich portions of the budget and probably do something on that. I would actually produce an ad and say, "Hey, Liberals, give us money so that we can keep this on the air."
Right.
Right. That's always a great one. That's a good one.
But there has to be a call to action, and there has to be something that you're giving for, and it can't just be so vanilla and beige and boring that people are like, yeah, okay, sure, no, thank you. Like, there is no shortage of topics for anyone on within mainstream political parties in Canada to raise money on. There is no shortage of issues and opportunities to do so, but you got to get your shit together. And I just got to say, I think you were touching more on what it is. I think there was a complacency and laziness that started to develop, and then I think a loss of a skill set, a loss of a culture of asking, and that this is actually a very crucial part of politics. And I think the Liberals have, at an institutional level, forgotten that.
Competition, competitive fire, compete level. It's mid-spring in Canada. Stanley Cup playoffs. Flip on any sports media, every third sentence features a variation on the word. Into that glut, I offer these observations on competition, but from an entirely different arena. And for you hurly-burlyites who pay close attention to these ads, I'll just note that's a pun inside a segue. Not shockingly, it's the world of telecom. Even less shockingly, they're from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. First, some fresh data. Because of a more competitive landscape in Ontario, which I'll come back to in about 30 seconds, internet prices there are falling, 7.2% in March, over 26% in the last 12 months. When we widen the aperture, and you might have seen this quoted in the federal budget, StatsCan reports cell phone plan rates have declined 50% since December 2018. Also from StatsCan, while overall inflation ticked up to 2.9% in March from 2.8% in February, cell phone prices continued to fall, now 26% cheaper year on year than March 2023. Back to Ontario and their falling internet prices. There's a reason for it. New entrants into the competitive landscape, like Koodo, one of TELUS's flanker brands. Pre-Koodo internet in Ontario, wireline prices were historically stable. A fancy way of saying they didn't get any cheaper. That all began to change last October. Fact is, companies like Koodo, who invest in new markets and put real skin in the game, are best equipped to offer innovative service packages and price promotions and bring sustainable competition. TELUS isn't shy about it. They've already made a difference in Ontario. They want to make a bigger difference for more customers east. Compete harder. To sum that up, I'll just borrow the perfect words of the late, very great Bob Cole, the soundtrack of so many Stanley Cup playoffs. Oh, baby. I'll just say I'm not sure there's a direct correlation here, but of the two federal campaigns I ran, the one that I won, I had more money than my opponents, and the one I lost, I had less money than my opponents, and the same is true in Ontario.
Certainly helps.
Well, it doesn't make all the difference, but it sure fucking helps.
Yeah.
Gives you options, right? And that's the thing. Gives you options.
Well, like I found it entertaining, listening to you and Scott and Jenny during the last provincial election, and you and Scott railing about, the Liberals have got to change to this message and they got to go and push on that. And I would chuckle and chuckle
money
about with
how?
what fucking money, to the people on this podcast, you've got to have something that you can execute with, otherwise you're just, down in the bunker moving armies around on a board that no longer exist on the surface of the world.
All right, let's move to what I want to be the meat of this discussion today, which is Mr. Poilievre and his remarkable, I think we'd all agree, op-ed in the National Post. Served a number of purposes for me. Now at least I know who reads the National Post, Pierre Poilievre. I didn't know before who read it, but it's quite a piece for a politician to have written, and it's quite a message. And I'm going to have a relatively long excerpt from it. The first half of the article is mostly a bunch of ad hominem attacks on a bunch of organizations and companies, which are very amusing to read, and I advise it. But the meat of the message is in the second half of the op-ed. At the most, the Chambers of Commerce, Business Council, and Canadian Federation of Independent Business hold pointless luncheons and meetings and write op-eds or record interviews that almost no one sees. As leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, I refuse to meet with the aforementioned groups. They tell me what I already know. If you want to stop Trudeau's latest tax hikes, don't talk to politicians about it, talk to the people. If the tax hike is going to force doctors to leave Canada, the medical associations must ensure every patient knows that. If your factory will have to forego expansion because Trudeau is taxing investment, assemble all your workers in the hall and tell them that. If his tax on venture capitalists is going to make it impossible for engineering grads to stay in Canada, make sure students and their parents in Kitchener-Waterloo know that. Obviously, my future government will do exactly the opposite of Trudeau on almost every issue. But that does not mean that businesses will get their way. In fact, they will get nothing from me unless they convince the people first. So here's a how-to guide for dealing with a Poilievre government. If you do have a policy proposal, don't tell me about it. Convince Canadians that it's good for them. Communicate your policy's benefits directly to workers, consumers, and retirees. When they start telling me about your ideas on the doorstop in Windsor, St. John's, Trois-Rivières, or Port Alberni, then I'll think about enacting it. To be clear, that will not happen because you testify at a parliamentary committee, host a Hill Day to meet MPs and senators, hold a lunch in 15 minutes from downtown Toronto, Ottawa, or do media no one sees. Your communications must reach truckers, waitresses, nurses, and carpenters, all the people who are too productive to tune into the above-mentioned platforms. Once upon a time, Canada's business community played a useful role in the political debate. In 1988, free trade with the U.S. was headed to defeat, so the business community campaigned aggressively to show Canadians that slamming the door on trade was risky, and the deal would mean better wages and prices. Support for free trade jumped. So free trade happened. Want to stop the latest tax hike? Or get bureaucracy out of the way to build homes, mines, factories, pipelines, and more? Then cancel your lunch meeting at the Rideau Club, fire your lobbyist, and go to the people. Okay. So, what's the point, Jordan?
Well, I think a hat tip on a matter of craft to Poilievre's team, because this is a very low cost and effective way to change the channel after what was a bumpy week for them. So I think it's very smart to deploy something like this. It has us, it has everybody, and certainly in the bubble, talking about it and dissecting it. I think the point here is really to reiterate what we heard Poilievre say already around the Board of Trade. It is to put some distance between himself and corporate Canada. I think that the team around him understands that the idea that there are strong links between the Conservatives and the business community is a vulnerability to his populist message. And so they're really seeking to create that distance and to paint a picture of somebody who is not operating with any connections to lobbyists. Now, I think the challenge for them on this is that it's just like patently untrue, right? Of course, there's been, we've had stories in the news recently about the links between lobbyists and Poilievre's inner circle, including Jenny Byrne, but also folks like Melissa Lantsman. You've got one of your top folks who was a lobbyist before coming. There's just a lot of, you have those connections that run very deep. So it's a challenging narrative to push out because it's contradicted by a lot of the infrastructure within the Conservative Party and a lot of the connections that Poilievre has. But I certainly tip my hat in the attempt to do it because they have to. They have to create that space. Otherwise, they're leaving open a flank of vulnerability, I think particularly for New Democrats to come in and make the argument that really, he talks a good game, but if you look at it, if you look at his connections, if you look at who he's working for, it is for corporate Canada. So I think this is an attempt on their part to shore that up. And I think this is a low cost and in this instance, a fairly effective way to do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Kory, as an approach, I'm pretty sure that this is generally what most GR professionals already tell their clients, which is 100%. that it's going to be effective if you get Canadians on side, and then the political system will react to that, right? Rather than having some cigars in a back room somewhere. That's not really how lobbying's done anymore. So it's pretty conventional advice in a way. But I will say, from my own experience, that's really only very large companies that have the capacity to, or industry associations, that have the capacity to do this. If you look through the client list of lobbyists, it's mostly, big regulated companies that have already a very big infrastructure set up to handle public image and reputation and advertising. I just came from a conference this weekend of a group called the OG 100, Ontario Growth 100. These are medium-sized businesses. This is, in a sense, the real economy. Everybody I met down there builds something or invented something or is exporting something. But none of those companies have a PR infrastructure or have the resources to convince Canadians of what their issue is.
Yeah, you have to have some level of pooling, I think, in order to get those resources. So, larger trade associations, that sort of thing. I don't know. I look at the farm sector sector is a good example of this, where, yes, they're big agribusiness companies, but associations that represent, hundreds of thousands of people who are, frontline farmers like that matters too. So like there are ways around that, but yeah, I don't think there's anything, shockingly unconventional about what Poilievre's advice is. I think, as somebody who's a dirty lobbyist himself, that's the kind of advice I give clients every day. So like I don't think that's particularly unconventional. I am going to, bristle a little bit at something that Jordan mentioned about, Poilievre having a bumpy week, and I'm going to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier on fundraising. I think he had the opposite of a bumpy week. I think you got to get out of the mindset of inside Ottawa. What are the media saying? What is everybody talking to each other about at the fucking Met? After question period. None of that is what matters. And I think if we want to tie it to what Poilievre's advice is, I think you can carry it forward. Like, you got to have some more populist issues and a presentation of those issues if you want to have resonance in public policy or fundraising, or you name the issue. But there's only one party that was selling bumper stickers with the word wacko on it by the end of the week, and it was not the NDP and the Liberals.
Bumpy week, schmumpy week. I'm not interested in talking about the horse race anymore until the Conservative number starts with a 3 and somebody else's number is higher than 25. Then I'll talk about the horse race again. But until then. So down in Clinton, Ontario, an hour north of London, there's a place called Sloman Park, and in it sits a single rail car. It's a strange little rail car, unlike anything in the CN fleet to which it once belonged. When you step inside this meticulously restored bit of railway history, which you can easily do because it's open to the public for visits, you'd swear you just stepped into a school classroom. And that would be because you did. For more than 40 years, from 1926 to 1967, it and 6 other rail cars like it rolled around northern Ontario, reaching students in remote mining towns. The rail cars delivered basic education in 5-day sessions once a month. They brought medicine and supplies. They even dispensed civics lessons to first-generation immigrants working in the deeps. The teachers in the school cars, as they were known, lived on the trains with their families. One of the most dedicated was Fred Sloman, the teacher on school car number 1. Sloman was a pedagogical nomad for most of his life, traveling between Sudbury, Caperhill, and Foylet. He and his wife Seela raised 5 children aboard the trains. There's a picture in the Ontario archives that captures the harshness and the hope of the time. A group of kids trooping out of a solitary icicle-encrusted school car, wading through deep snow, clutching their book bags. When the school cars moved on to the next towns, Sloman and his fellow teachers would leave students with 3 weeks of homework. It's a completely Canadian story, and it happened on the rail lines of our sponsor, CN. Fred Sloman was an ordinary Canadian hero, and now he has a public park in Clinton named after him, with his school car parked in it. He deserves to be remembered. Listen, this conversation really takes me to a broader point than just lobbying. Poilievre has a theory about who will vote for him and why that is very different from the conventional wisdom that existed before he took over. Most people, for instance, thought a breakthrough in Ontario would require a credible climate plan, would require the expunging of social conservatives from their caucus and movement, would require moderation. I lectured Jenny about this ad nauseum on the podcast for several years, and she always disagreed. And Poilievre has gone in a different direction. Rather than position himself as the safe, uninteresting alternative in a change election, which would have been a very plausible positioning to have, he's in every way portraying himself as a disruptor. And he has exposed the fact that the true adherence to the liberal norms that I said he had to buy down to is a pretty small slice of the electorate, a much smaller slice of the electorate than I thought. And it really exists in downtown cores of major cities. And when he's done, That's what the Liberals and the NDP are going to have to divide amongst themselves. What's happening, Jordan, is big with long-term ramifications.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think one thing that really strikes me about Poilievre's whole theory of the vote coalition that he's looking for and how he's prosecuting the case on it is that I think that, and you see this particularly in the last year, his campaign has largely kept at their core the one key thing that the Liberals have forgotten to talk about consistently over the last 18 months, and that's the voter. And that's what the voter is experiencing and what they are concerned about in their life. And I think that some of the issues that you're talking about, David, so for example, credible climate policy and things like that, those bars of credibility that perhaps in the past it was felt people needed to get over, those are when people are struggling, it's not as important anymore. It's not as salient. People are looking for something that is going to impact their lives, and he's hit on a narrative that touches those things. And having the opposition to that coming from the Liberals be so distanced from people's lived experience has actually only reinforced that gap. So I think for me, that's the thing that's the most notable about their approach, what has allowed them to break out of the Ottawa bubble, because I agree with you, that is not driving where people are thinking about putting their vote at this point. And maybe we can circle back around, because I think we should also talk about what are the vulnerabilities for Poilievre. Like, what are the ways that other parties can go after the vote coalition that he is trying to put back together and peel some of those voters back off? Because I think that's really the only conversation that should be happening in either the orange or the red tents right now. But I'm sure Kory's also got thoughts on how we got here.
Yeah.
Well, I've always, have always agreed with the thesis that Jenny used to present on the show around the issue of a climate plan, et cetera. As you recall, in 2018, we ran on a cap and trade plan for the Ford government to cap taxes, trade Kathleen Wynne. And I think we also said we'd clean up some litter in parks and plant some trees somewhere. I'm just not sure where. And that worked just fine. And some version of that worked just fine, against Michael Ignatieff and against Stéphane Dion, and the folks that sort of went the other direction. So looking at you, Aaron O'Toole, it didn't work well. It was not the right approach, and so I just have never bought that. I've never seen evidence in any of the polling that I've looked at that theory is actually true. I think it's the same sort of framing exercise that every successful campaign goes through. If you put the frame around a certain portion of the picture, and it's something that people agree with and think is connected to their lives and outcomes that they're looking for, you will do very well in that election. And when you disregard what it is that concerns Canadians, or you argue with them about what they are concerned about, which is kind of what I think the Liberals have reduced themselves to federally, you're going to get your ass kicked.
Right. Well, how much of a factor in this, how much of the reason that I was wrong and you and Jenny were right, is because I was inappropriately underestimating the demise of the influence of media. Because Poilievre is really going right around the legacy media. He shows nothing but contempt for it whenever he has to deal with it, does not use it as his primary way of delivering a message, and has the resources to go directly to people where they are on their screens and reach them with a message. And as a consequence, one of the things conservatives have railed about over the years is that the legacy media would frame and interpret their positions and then recycle them out to the public in a way that seemed unappealing or un-Canadian or in some way. Is the absence of that filter a big factor in the success of this approach of Poilievre's?
Loss of the audience for traditional media is what's, I think, ultimately won the day. And I think the conservatives and conservatives generally operate more effectively within the space that we're in now, because they've been working on those things and practicing them much longer. They've had to, innovate ways to go around the media. And and used, social media and other technologies more effectively in order to get any message out in the old days. And they're still doing those same things and adapting and moving forward in that way. But what's changed is the conventional media have lost their audience. Like, it just doesn't exist anymore. So he can feel however he wants about them, as can anyone else. The reality is they just don't matter. They don't matter.
Right. All right. So give us you wanted an opportunity, Jordan. Give us a pop as to what is a vulnerability that Poilievre has opened up that would allow the NDP to take back, to win Port Alberni.
So I think, and in fact, the further forward in time we go and the more we see, the more I'm persuaded of this, that really the most important vulnerability that you're seeing coming out of the Conservatives is the notion that they are going to cut services and things that people rely on, that regular people have in their lives, that they count on, and that those will no longer be there for you when you need them. And so I'm talking about, for example, Poilievre goes out and includes payroll taxes in the taxes that he's railing against. Well, great. Okay, so that's your CPP and that's your EI. Is he going to cut that so that's not there when you need it? Is he going to go after some of the other things that are newer? He's not going to commit to dental care. He's not going to commit to the contraception. There are some undertones to that, of course, around being pro-choice or anti-choice that I think are also significant and can be motivating. But really at the core of it, the notion that he's going to say a lot of stuff, but when it comes down to it, you can't trust him. He is going to cut the things that you count on. And they have left a vulnerability on this in a few ways, because, of course, they're out there talking about finding government efficiencies in an undetermined, open-ended way. They're talking about one in, one out rule in terms of new program spending and legislation. And I think that, those types of things, well, they sound really good in the room of the people who are thinking them up, and particularly if those people are a bit of a anti-tax libertarian stripe, they really open up a lot of room for your opponents to characterize what those cuts are going to be and what the impact is going to be on people. And so I think that is the message that has to be absolutely hammered, particularly by New Democrats. And you see them starting to do it, although interestingly, I have not really seen the Liberals glom onto this as a cohesive attack line. And I think that's the main thing. The second thing I think to keep an eye on is Poilievre's negatives. They are high. And that can also be a vulnerability if if other things come into play.
Is it fair to say, just to interrupt you for a second, Jordan?
Yeah.
If we were being honest with each other, we would both say they're not as high as we thought they would be at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think that's also a function of the fact that there's really nobody out there making the case about why he might not be the right person. And so it's also a weird world in which this is all absent any negative advertising. So he's had the opportunity to go out and make the case directly to the public through paid advertising that he's warm and fuzzy. But then you can see that running counter to a lot of his own instincts and things. And we can talk about anything from, the stop at the border and, kind of dealing with these people to, like, even just in the last 2 weeks, right? Like the wacko comments in the House of Commons, or to, just going out and saying, well, I'm going to use the notwithstanding clause on, a lot more, just a lot more, right? Like, so a lot of these things can lend themselves to characterization that this guy is a bully, that he's like, one of the problems is that he's like kind of a dick, right? And I think that there is an opportunity to marry that with the message, the core message, which has to be about the risk of the things that you rely on, that these are going to be hurt and cut and deprioritized by a Pierre Poilievre government. But of course, somebody would have to put money behind this in order to get it in front of the eyes of voters in Port Alberni and elsewhere.
Artificial intelligence is the talk of the town in Ottawa. In the budget, the Feds stated their intention to make Canada an AI powerhouse by accelerating the uptake of AI to help businesses be more productive, unlock value for younger generations, and build an economy that works for everyone. To them, it's become a competitive imperative. How do Canadians feel about AI? Well, they aren't so sure. Only 31% trust it, well behind the 50% global average. Clearly, some trust building is needed. Governments and researchers play a role. But if Canadian companies build secure AI solutions that Canadians value, that trust can be earned through experience. Our sponsor, Wealthsimple, is doing just that. Whether it's enhanced security and fraud protection, faster account transfers, or an immediate feedback loop so their engineers can focus on building the features clients value most, Wealthsimple uses AI-powered tools to make managing your money more convenient, more secure, and less expensive. As AI permeates the mainstream, Wealthsimple will keep using technology to better serve Canadians and help build a well-rounded economy that works for everyone today and tomorrow.
There are always things that you can. I don't care who the candidate is that you can put out to make people think less highly of them. But I think Jordan just hit the key point. You've got to prosecute the case. You've got to actually take the message to people who are voters. And talking about it in the salons in Ottawa and on cable news networks that no one is watching is
Twitter.
Not going to do it. Not going to do it. So, there's lots of arguments for everyone, but once again, things that are pointed out, like meeting carbon tax protesters, and they you would think that Poilievre had stepped on a landmine. No, I just produced a bunch more content to push out and raise more money to kick your respective asses even more. It's just the lack of execution borderlines on political malpractice on the part of the Liberals and the NDP.
So you've seen their fundraising numbers. And there isn't a lot. If you raise $15 million in a year, that doesn't leave you that much for advertising. Not year-long advertising, that's for sure, the way the Conservatives are doing. But I would argue, and I'm interested in whether or not either one of you disagree, that there's almost nothing that the Liberal Party organization could possibly be doing right now with their money that is more important than persuasion. I mean, this 20-point gap is going to, the longer it sits there, the more it distorts everything about them. And the hill just gets steeper and steeper, and the filters you have to fight your way through of cynicism about anything you try to do get more and more difficult. I can't think of anything that would be more important than narrowing that gap.
And raising money. Starting a year ago, right? And I think that this is actually something that is maybe a newer phenomenon as we enter into a time of what is really becoming a permanent campaign. Like, this has come for us, right? And the reality is that the first impressions that people have of a new leader are so vitally important. And so I think that the Liberals made a massive tactical error in holding, and whether that's because they didn't have the money or not, that's an internal problem for them.
But this is left for history now, but that's
right. And the notion of holding fire until people are quote unquote paying attention during a campaign, it is not what it used to be. There is a primary happening, and particularly there is absolutely, when you have the situation that we do, when your incumbent is so massively unpopular and people are shopping around, they are looking around, they are ready to stick to something else. That unless you're able to poison the well on that early on, you're giving people such a long runway to take that idea of voting Conservative, to try it on for size, to become more comfortable with it. And I think that it's just deadly. And so, not only do they need to begin to do that now, they really needed to be doing it a year ago or 18 months ago, or even better, immediately after the leadership, to not allow to disqualify Poilievre before he could really get in there and pull those loose voters in the way that he has. Now, I think that part of the challenge for the Conservatives is that a lot of what they're doing right now is now going to motivation, right? It's going to motivate their base. It's going to motivate some of those voters that they have gotten now stuck onto them, and continue getting them energized and hopefully getting them to turn out. And so the thinking has to be, how are we peeling those voters off the edges who are not deeply adhered to the Conservatives? What can be done? But that is a lot harder to do than it is to prevent people from floating over there in the first place.
Yeah. Kory, it's nice that Jordan frames this in the context of what the Liberal Party should have been doing. But the real victims here are the NDP. I mean, it is 338's analysis or David Coletto's analysis or the two of them together's analysis that about 13% or so, I think, of previous NDP voters are voting for Poilievre right now. And the NDP have partially made that up by stealing votes from the Liberals in downtown. So they've lost Port Alberni votes to Poilievre, and they've picked up Toronto votes. And to partially make up for that. What is it about the progressive side of the ledger that made itself vulnerable to Poilievre stealing their votes?
It's complete and utter detachment from reality in terms of its issue set. Like, the amount of time that's spent on values issues that are really at the top of the old Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're worried about pronouns and political correctness and wokeism and all of that kind of shit. And they've forgotten that how you get there is actually worrying about more meat and potatoes issues for typical voters. And I'm not saying that values issues don't have a place in the world. They obviously do, and they can move some voters around for sure. But not in the big numbers that you need in order to be effective. And I think that the further you get away from those media centers and like large urban culture, the more and more steeped in reality you become. And things that you can talk about and people will take seriously at a coffee shop in downtown Toronto are the kind of stuff that would get you laughed out of the coffee shop in Young, Saskatchewan or in Prelate. It's, I think it's just a detachment from reality. And, the NDP used to be a lot more attached to reality, and they've become less and less so over time. You're seeing their voters abandon them, but at the provincial level too. Like I think the way that you framed it is absolutely correct. They're grabbing some Liberal votes in urban areas for reasons that Jordan mentioned in terms of there being a bit of a primary going on with the progressives, but they have totally walked away from the game and the table and large swaths of the province and the country. Sadly, I don't think it's great for our politics generally, but that's what's happened.
Well, I think reports of the death of the rural New Democrat are greatly exaggerated. Look, there is a problem.
They're down to like a couple of percent in the by-election held this past week.
They're quitting, Jordan.
I'll get there.
They're quitting, Jordan.
I'll get there. Don't worry. You're foreshadowing my hey you. But let me do the dirty work on that one. But listen, I think for sure, and there's a vote efficiency problem, of course, right? When you start talking about those downtown votes and I think though, it is worth pointing out that the New Democrats now nationally have a larger vote universe than the Liberals do. So there is a big realignment happening, and that's for sure. But if you look at what's happening at the provincial level across the country, absolutely, New Democrats retain the ability to campaign and win in rural seats. That is something that we're seeing in Manitoba. We're seeing competitively in Saskatchewan. We're seeing in Alberta, and we're seeing also in BC. So I think we have to be very careful about writing that off. The federal party, I think, has absolutely...
Whoa. Like what rural seat have the NDP won in rural Saskatchewan?
Competing,
in the
Kory,
last
I said.
3 fucking decades.
Competing is not having a name on the ballot. My name was on a ballot in Saskatchewan, and I was not competitive. Okay,
you hear that, like people in Saskatchewan? Your brethren like here, they want to tell you what the outcome's going to be already. Do not listen to these people, friends. You have the choice.
I had to run to get on the subway the other day. I was not competing in the Olympics. That was me running, Joe Biden style, to get on a train.
I think they protest too much.
Come on,
listen.
I think you're drinking your own bathwater there. Sorry.
Well, we'll come back to the Saskatchewan one, that's for sure. But look, I think the federal party does have a bigger challenge, and I don't think that there's any question there. I think that partly has to do with Singh and the voters that he is appealing to. But the party needs to have either basically some of these urban seats and some suburban seats, or they need to be able to retain some of those rural seats. They need to have a vote coalition that actually produces some vote efficiency for them. And that's a challenge that they have going forward for sure.
Right. All right. Well, I would say the NDP have really pulled their punch. Really pulled their punch on one issue, and that is Gaza. Because, the prospect, surely, of a Singh leadership was suburban Canada, right? And the immigrant populations of suburban Canada are pretty unhappy with what they're seeing in Gaza right now. And they don't really have a political outlet. If he had chosen to be that political outlet, I'm not suggesting that would have been good for Canada. I would have been unhappy about that. But as a political move, was that even contemplated?
Well, I think you absolutely saw them doing that. In fact, the Opposition Day motion, which we discussed at length a few episodes ago, is evidence of that. Look, they had an opportunity there in that Opposition Day to go much harder at the Liberals, to cleave their caucus on the issue. And they elected not to because they were working with the Muslim community, and that community wanted a win in that motion. So I think that actually they have taken that space on the issue of what's happening in Gaza, and they've been able to be a voice for a significant group of Canadians who are very unhappy with what's happening in a way that the Liberals have not been able to, because even though you could make the argument that the Liberals have been drawn to the same direction, it's been kicking and screaming every inch of the way, and they're not able to take any credit for it. So I actually think that in terms of doing on this issue, what they needed to do to appeal to segments of the vote in suburban Canada, I think they've done what they can while remaining within the broad mainstream of Canadian public opinion on the issue.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty unconvinced. Like I agree with David in terms of there is an opportunity there, but I think what you just described is them taking a pass on the opportunity, and I think they've been taking a pass on a lot of opportunities in the interest of maintaining, the current government. Like I think other considerations are coming before their own popularity, and be it their coalition agreement or what their sense of where the media is at on these things. But like they're kind of I don't know, like it seems like there was an issue there to exploit, and they took a pass. Like they bunted where they needed to actually swing for the fences. So like no one's ever gotten a home run bunting.
So sad for the Leafs, that we're already into baseball metaphors now.
I can do every sports metaphor.
R.I.P.
All right. So the last, just a quick moment here. Jordan, let's lean on your expertise here. Quick moment. The government in the budget announced a $6 billion commitment to disabled people. And in the process, pissed off every disabled person in Canada and all of their advocates. What's the moral of the story here?
Moral of the story is don't overpromise and underdeliver and delay for 4 years. So it's a combination of issues. I think as a history lesson, this is a commitment that the Liberals have made, well, at minimum since 2020, that this was something that they were going to do. Very, very big promises were made, not just that there was going to be a benefit, but that this was going to lift a significant number of people out of poverty. And, we've talked about this on other podcasts, but it is a really this is a very big population of people. And, and I think I saw a stat the other day that over the course of your lifetime, about a third of Canadians can expect to find themselves disabled in one way or another, temporarily or permanently. And so this is something that impacts quite a lot of people, where poverty is very deep. Being low income is almost the norm, over 40%. So it's something that was a crying need. And they just failed to do any expectations management. They consulted, they engaged the community. Expectations were allowed to grow very, very high. And this was combined with
so high, Jordan, that people were expecting that these people might be raised out of poverty.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it sounds awful, right? Because it is. But look, I mean, you have to also, I think also CERB has changed. CERB has changed what expectations are when it comes to income assistance. Because as it turns out, that as a country, if we decide that it's unacceptable for people to live on less, for example, than $2,000 a month, we can change that. And so people now have a much greater sense of possibility for that type of direct income assistance than I would argue that they did before the pandemic. It set a new benchmark. Like, what is a dignified amount of money to receive if you're relying on government support because of something outside of your control? And so with the table being set in that way, I think what they came up with, not just bad, but like insultingly low, very difficult to qualify for. And like $200 a month it works out to if you can jump through all the hoops to get that. And it's just such a little amount of money, especially in the cost of living crisis, that it's really a slap in the face and it's an insult. And I think, it's so notable that the government is unable to, or unwilling completely, to say how many people this will lift out of poverty, because it's the square root of none. So your policy is so poor as to be completely ineffective and to be insulting to the community that you've engaged with. They set it up all wrong, and the execution was so bad that it's now just become a net negative for them.
Kory, why didn't they just not do this and keep their $6 billion or put it somewhere else where there was a vote, maybe?
Yeah, that probably would have been a smarter move, but they made their bet on this. Now they're laying in it. But yeah, look, you can sum it up by it's better to undercommit and overdeliver, and they did the opposite of that. And this is what you get when you do that. And kind of almost doesn't matter what issue it is, but yeah. Anyway, I agree. They probably would have been better to do nothing.
Right. All right, Mr. Pinsent. You ready to wrap this up for us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay. Who's got a Hey You?
I do.
I have a feeling we're gonna do something similar on both. So you go first.
My Hey You this week is going out to the Ontario NDP about the by-election results in Milton and Lambton.
You guys should have run candidates.
No, listen. Okay. In seriousness, I would like to shout out to the people who run where there is little hope. Thank you. Because it is really a fucking thankless task. So it is not on them. It is not on them. And I want to be really clear about that. But I would like my fellow New Democrats to pull up a chair. Look, I know these ridings may not have been ours to win. That is true. That is fair. But if you are interested in replacing the Liberals in Ontario as the government in waiting, at minimum, you have to show that you can continue to beat them in Southwestern Ontario. It is not a good look to come very, very third in a Southwestern Ontario seat. That cannot be allowed to happen. And it is just not enough to be the voice of the opposition in Queen's Park. Nobody is watching. You have to get out of there. You have to get Marit out of Toronto more frequently. Marit does great when she's out. She's in those ridings. She's talking to regular people. This is where she needs to be. You also have to get on a campaign footing. You need to find a campaign message and start to hammer it relentlessly. You need to get on campaign footing. There should be an EPC active and firing right now to reorient the whole organization to this one singular goal. And that is my Hey You this week. Please let these by-elections absolutely be a wake-up call. Do not explain this away. This is your shot. Don't miss it.
All right. Good one. Kory?
Well, I'm going to talk about the Ontario by-elections as well, but I was just going to do a shout-out to Z. Hammond and Steve Pinsonneau, who got elected, and maybe do a little bit of bragging on behalf of the larger Ford team. But after winning a big majority in 2018, an even bigger one in 2022, the numbers in these by-elections, which are typically very difficult for incumbent governments to do well in, are even higher. And there's not a lot of people who would have thought that they'd be in the Liberal Party in Ontario, that they would be longing for the days of Stephen Del Duca and being able to see numbers and returns.
They're not.
Are you sure?
It's a good line, though.
5 points better, more than that, in Milton. And you got to think about where Milton is. This is right next to where Bonnie Crombie's supposed to be the strongest. It's right next to Mississauga,
right in the neighborhood.
And she got her ass kicked, like, badly. And that's it's really, really a sad state of affairs in Liberal land in Ontario these days.
All right, you guys are going to force me to get into this. I wasn't going to respond to your hey yous, but you're going to force me to respond to your hey yous, which is to say, I'm sure that you await with great anticipation the era of Prime Minister Poilievre, because, the Conservatives looked safe as houses in 1984 in Ontario, but by 1985 was a different matter altogether. And Bonnie Crombie's carrying around a goddamned anvil by the name of Justin Trudeau right now, and she won't always be. So,
go back to what we were talking about earlier. With what money? Like with what candidates?
David, I recognize the self-delusion when I see it.
There's probably
careful
a lesson
how
there.
much you tell yourself that story.
My hey you is much more modest. My hey you goes out to one of the hardest working people in show business, David Cochrane. Vashi Kapelos justifiably gets a lot of love on this show, but David Cochrane is also producing an excellent show over on the CBC, and it's 2 hours long. So I watch it pretty much every day. Sometimes I watch it from 5 to 7, but I almost invariably watch it from 6 to 7. David, you do a great job. You're super informed. You really put your guests through their paces. I learn a lot on the show. Thank you for doing that, and especially thank you for the 6 to 7 hour slot. That's our show for this week. Yeah.
Here.
Exactly. All right, that's our show for this week. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, CN and Wealth Simple. I want to thank you two for showing up, unlike that fucker Reid. And we'll be back next week, accursed, with more of this quality banter. See you then.